The DJ cranked up another cheesy wedding song, the dance floor a sweaty mess of swaying bodies. Sarah, radiant in her white dress, was laughing with my sister, oblivious to the bomb she'd just dropped. My blood ran cold. "Did you just say, Dad?" I croaked, the words catching in my throat. Sarah's smile faltered. "What? No," she said, her voice a touch too high. I meant to say." The crowd noise seemed to fade away, replaced by a dull roar in my ears. My gaze darted around the room, searching for some escape pod from this surreal moment. Everyone seemed happy, blissfully unaware of the darkness that threatened to consume me. "Sarah," I pressed, my voice low and dangerous. "What did you mean by Dad?" She met my gaze for a fleeting moment, a flicker of fear in her eyes betraying the carefully constructed facade. Then, her face hardened. "Nothing," she snapped, "you must have heard wrong. Come on, let's dance." She reached for my hand, but I recoiled. The warmth of her touch suddenly felt foreign, repulsive. "Dance?" I scoffed, "Not until you tell me what the hell that was about." The music seemed to screech to a halt, replaced by a collective gasp from the crowd. All eyes were on us now, the picture of perfect newlyweds crumbling before them. Sarah's cheeks flushed crimson. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "We can talk about this later, in private." Later? How could I possibly wait later? The seed of doubt, once planted, was taking root, twisting and growing with each passing second. I wouldn't let her push this under the rug. Not anymore. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "We talk about it now. Right here, right now." The silence was deafening. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, desperate for an escape, for someone to intervene. But there was no escape. Not anymore. The truth, whatever it was about to come out. And a horrifying part of me, a part one didn't recognize, couldn't wait to hear it. The room held its breath, 1,000 eyes locked on Sarah and me. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, each beat echoing the growing storm of emotions inside me. "Dad?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You're saying?" Sarah's voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. "Yes," she confessed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "It started at the reception." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My own wedding reception, the very night I pledged my life to her, they were. A wave of nausea washed over me, threatening to spill over. "But, why?" I managed to choke out, the question laced with disbelief and a raw, primal anger. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, carving tracks through her carefully applied makeup. I don't know," she stammered. He just touched me. And I didn't stop him." Disgust and fury twisted in my gut. Suddenly, all those little things I'd ignored over the years. The lingering glances between them, the hushed conversations, the way Dad would sometimes look at her with a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. All of it clicked into place. "Didn't stop him?" I echoed, my voice rising a notch. "How could you just let that happen?" "I was young," she pleaded. "And naive. It was just a moment of weakness." "A moment of weakness?" They continued this weakness for a year and a half. The betrayal was like a festering wound, raw and exposed. "A moment?" I scoffed. "You call an affair that lasted over a year a moment?" Sarah flinched at the harshness in my voice. "It wasn't planned," she mumbled. "It just happened." "But it stopped, right?" I pressed, desperate for some shred of normalcy, for some assurance that this wasn't a lifelong betrayal. Her silence was deafening. My gaze darted back to her face, the answer reflected in her tear-filled eyes. "It didn't, did it?" I whispered, the truth settling in my stomach like a cold stone. "It happened again, didn't it?" The air crackled with unspoken words. each beat of silence echoed louder than the stunned gasps that had erupted moments before. My gaze flickered between Sarah's tear-streaked face and the gawking crowd, a surreal detachment washing over me. It happened again, I finally said, my voice raspy. When? Sarah chewed her lip, tears glistening in her lashes. After Mom passed. So for 2 years, you. The words wouldn't 2 years of shared grief used as a twisted excuse for their betrayal. It was a mistake, she mumbled, as if that could erase decades of lies. A mistake, I repeated, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. This whole marriage seems to be one big mistake, doesn't it? A sob escaped her lips, but I barely registered it. My mind was a chaotic storm, churning with questions and a growing sense of betrayal that gnawed at my insides. There's more, isn't there? I rasped, the words heavy with dread. Somehow, I already knew. Sarah's eyes widened in alarm. No, she choked out, a flicker of desperation in her gaze. There's nothing else. But the lie hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. Intuition, honed by years of ignoring small inconsistencies, screamed at me. Look at me, Sarah, I commanded, my voice low and dangerous. Tell me the truth, everything. A tremor ran through her, and she finally met my gaze. The fear in her eyes mirrored the icy knot forming in my stomach. It never really stopped, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. We'd see each other occasionally for years. Years, the revelation punched the air out of my lungs. My entire married life, built on a foundation of sand, was crumbling around me. But, our kids, I stammered, a horrifying thought slithering into my mind. There weren't others, were there? Sarah's gaze flickered away for a fleeting moment, then she locked eyes with me, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched, each tick of the clock an eternity. There was one other time, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. One other time, I echoed, the words devoid of meaning. When? Before we were married, Sarah mumbled, shame twisting her features. Just a one-night stand. One night stand, suddenly, everything, the lingering doubts about our early days, the whispers about her past, clicked into place. My world had been built on a lie that stretched back before our vows were even spoken. The wedding reception felt like a lifetime ago. Gone were the joyful speeches, the clinking of glasses, the carefree dancing. In their place, a suffocating silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the occasional sniffle from Sarah and the hushed murmurs of the stunned crowd. I couldn't bear to look at them, the friends and family who'd witnessed the unraveling of my life. Shame burned in my gut, a searing counterpoint to the icy rage that gnawed at my insides. Sarah kept stealing glances at me, her face a mask of guilt and desperation. Every time I met her gaze, I saw not the woman I'd loved for nearly 4 decades, but a stranger who'd built our entire life on a foundation of lies. Days turned into a blur of strained silences and tearful apologies. Sarah tried to explain, to justify, but her words were meaningless noise compared to the deafening roar of betrayal in my head. The weight of this secret choked the air out of every room. Conversation, once filled with easy banter, became a minefield of unspoken accusations and simmering anger. How could we talk about the weather, the kids, anything normal, when the very foundation of our existence was rotten? The thought of telling the kids was like a physical blow. How could I break their world apart like this? They deserved better than this tangled web of deceit. Yet, the thought of keeping this secret, of pretending everything was normal, felt equally unbearable. The innocence of our 17 grandchildren mocked the darkness that now consumed me. Their laughter, once a source of joy, now echoed the hollowness within me. Sleep offered no escape, nightmares, vivid and relentless, replayed the scenes of their betrayal, twisting the knife deeper in my gut. The house, once a haven of shared memories, became a suffocating prison. Every corner held a ghost of a happy moment, now tainted by the knowledge of their lies. The furniture, the pictures, even the worn carpet, everything felt like a lie. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence pressed in on me like a physical force. I needed to get out, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of our shared betrayal. "I'm going for a walk," I announced to Sarah, my voice raspy. She looked up, startled, a flicker of hope flitting across her face. "Do you want me to come?" The question pushed me over the edge. "No," I snapped, "I need some time alone." Her hope flickered and died, replaced by a flicker of something that might have been fear. I didn't care, all I wanted was to escape this web of lies, to breathe air that wasn't choked with deceit. Stepping out into the cool night air, I slammed the door behind me with a force that rattled the windows. It wasn't enough. The anger, the hurt, it all boiled over, threatening to consume me. I needed answers, needed them bad, and maybe, just maybe, there was someone who could give them to me. Someone who'd known all along. Rain lashed against the windshield as I drove aimlessly, the wipers struggling to keep pace with the downpour. My mind was a churning storm, replaying memories in a relentless loop. Every happy moment from our marriage was now tainted, poisoned by the knowledge of their betrayal. Back at the house, Sarah had watched me leave with a mixture of fear and something else I couldn't quite decipher. Maybe desperation, pity, it didn't matter. Right now, all I craved was the truth, some shred of understanding in this chaotic mess. My gaze drifted to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of a familiar building, the retirement home where my dad spent his final years. A jolt shot through me. A memory, long buried, surfaced from the murky depths of my mind. Years ago, after a particularly heated argument with my father, a bitter accusation had slipped from my lips. "Leave her alone," I'd yelled, the words fueled by a potent mix of anger and a strange, unexplainable jealousy. My father's reaction had been odd. A flicker of something akin to panic crossed his face before he dismissed my outburst with a forced laugh. Now, with the weight of Sarah's confession heavy on my chest, the memory took on a sinister new light. Had it been about Sarah? Was my gut feeling all those years ago more than just youthful suspicion? Another memory flickered. My mother, a worried crease between her brows, once mentioned catching Dad acting strangely around Sarah. Had she suspected something too? The thought gnawed at me. Desperate for any shred of evidence, for confirmation of my growing suspicions, I knew what I had to do. Returning home, the house felt colder, more oppressive than ever. Ignoring Sarah's questioning glance, I made a beeline for the attic, a dusty repository of our past. Boxes piled high, overflowing with forgotten treasures and faded memories. Hours bled into one another as I sifted through old photo albums, love letters, birthday cards. Anything that might hold a clue, a whisper of the truth. Disappointment gnawed at me. Just as I was about to give up, a forgotten photo album slipped from a dusty stack, scattering its contents across the floor. My heart lurched as a crumpled piece of paper fluttered to my feet. It was a love note, the faded ink barely discernible. But the elegant handwriting, the endearments whispered on the page, there was no mistaking it. It was Sarah's, and it was addressed to Dad. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. The air grew thin, the room closing in around me. This wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown love story playing out under my very nose, hidden in plain sight for decades. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through me. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the incriminating note. Years of betrayal, a lifetime of lies, all laid bare on this single sheet of paper. With a trembling hand, I pocketed the note, the weight of it a tangible symbol of their deceit. I needed air, space to process this shattering discovery. My gaze fell on the stairs, leading down to where Sarah sat, oblivious to the truth I now held. The confrontation, I knew, was inevitable. And this time, I wouldn't hold back. The truth, however ugly, would finally be laid bare. The crumpled love note felt heavy in my pocket, a constant reminder of the betrayal that poisoned my life. Sleep was a stranger, replaced by restless nights fueled by anger and a gnawing sense of injustice. The house, once a haven, felt like a tomb. Every corner echoed with memories, both happy and painful, now tainted by the knowledge of their lies. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the phantom echoes of laughter and everyday conversations. Even the furniture, the worn rug where the kids used to play, everything seemed to mock me with its normalcy. The lawyer's office was sterile and impersonal, the air thick with the weight of legalese and broken dreams. Divorce. The word hung heavy in the air, a concrete symbol of the fractured remains of my life. Alimony, child support, asset division, the financial implications were daunting, another layer of stress heaped upon the mountain of emotional turmoil. That money was a distant concern right now, all I wanted was the truth, a full accounting of their years-long deceit. And maybe, just maybe, a shred of justice. The days blurred together in a haze of grief and anger. Social gatherings became an unbearable ordeal. Facing friends and acquaintances, pretending everything was normal, felt like a betrayal itself. The forced smiles, the awkward silences, it was all too much to bear. Isolation became my only solace. Yet, the silence was deafening, the solitude suffocating. I knew I needed help, someone to talk to unload the crushing weight of this burden. Reaching out to John, my oldest friend, felt like a lifeline thrown across a vast ocean of despair. He listened patiently, his gruff exterior belying a well of empathy. The words tumbled out, a torrent of pain and anger that I hadn't even realized I was holding back. John's anger, when it came, surprised me. That lying snake. He roared, his voice thick with fury. You deserve better, Mark. Far better. His anger, unexpected and fierce, kindled a spark of hope within me. Maybe I wasn't alone in this. Maybe there was still something left to salvage from the wreckage of my life. Slowly, tentatively, I began to reach out. A call to my sister, a coffee date with an old college buddy, each connection, however fleeting, felt like a lifeline thrown across the abyss. And to my surprise, support emerged from unexpected corners. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years offered a listening ear, old colleagues reached out with words of encouragement. Even Sarah's sister, tears glistening in her eyes, confessed she'd always suspected something was amiss. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time since Sarah's confession, a flicker of hope flickered in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, I could weather this storm. Maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild my life, piece by broken piece. The silence at the dinner table was deafening. My gaze bounced between my two grown children, their faces etched with a mixture of sadness and confusion. The news of the divorce had hit them hard, forcing them to choose sides in a battle they never asked to be in. So, it's true, Sarah finally broke the silence, her voice tight with emotion. Dad's the reason? I swallowed the lump in my throat, the crumpled love note burning a hole in my pocket. Yes, I rasped. There's no easy way to say this, but it's been going on for years. The revelation hung heavy in the air, a bomb detonated in the carefully constructed facade of our family life. My son, ever the pragmatist, cleared his throat. How long? He asked, his voice flat. Years, I repeated, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. But how could you not know? My daughter choked out, tears welling in her eyes. Shame washed over me, the signs, I realized with a sickening clarity, had always been there. The lingering glances, the hushed conversations, the way Dad would sometimes look at Sarah with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I'd willfully ignored them, dismissed them as nothing. Now, the truth slapped me in the face, a bitter fruit of my own denial. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal wrangling and emotional turmoil. Sarah's lawyers, predictably, painted a different picture, portraying me as the cold, distant husband while casting her as the victim. The truth, as always, was a messy labyrinth. As the financial realities of the separation sunk in, the stress intensified. Adjusting to a new, smaller living space and a significantly reduced income was a challenge. But the emotional toll was far greater. Slowly, though, whispers began to reach me. Old friends, former colleagues, they all harbored suspicions about Sarah and Dad's relationship. Their stories, fragments of a larger truth, painted a picture of a betrayal that stretched back even further than I originally thought. The web of deceit, it seemed, ran deeper than I could have imagined. Spending time with the grandkids, however, became a source of solace in this storm. Their innocent laughter, their unfiltered affection, it was a reminder of the good in the world, a reason to keep moving forward. One afternoon, driven by a deep, primal need for closure, I found myself standing at my father's grave. The wind rustled through the leaves, a mournful echo of the anger that churned within me. "You bastard," I choked out, the words scraping raw against my throat. "You stole not just my wife, but years of my life. Years I can't get back." Tears streamed down my face, a torrent of long-suppressed grief and rage finally finding release. There would be no apology, no explanation, just this raw, primal scream into the indifferent wind. Healing wasn't a linear path. There were good days and bad, moments of anger and despair followed by fleeting glimpses of hope. Small victories, a new haircut, a renewed gym membership, felt like giant leaps forward. Letting go of the anger and resentment towards Sarah was a crucial step. Forgiveness, I realize, wasn't about condoning her actions, but about freeing myself from the poisonous grip of the past. Filling the void left by the shattered relationship, I explored new hobbies and interests. Photography, cooking classes, volunteering at the local animal shelter, each new pursuit chipped away at the emptiness, reminding me that there was a life beyond the wreckage of my marriage. The thought of dating again was both intimidating and oddly intriguing. Was I ready to open myself up to new possibilities? The answer, for now, remained shrouded in uncertainty. Forgiving the children, understanding that they were caught in the crossfire, allowed for a tentative mending of broken relationships. Holidays and family gatherings took on a new, more informal form as we navigated the new family dynamic. Then, one rainy afternoon, a chance encounter at the local bookstore turned my world upside down. There, standing in the fiction aisle, was Emily, a flame from my college days. The spark, rekindled after all these years, was undeniable. Could this be a new beginning? The future, once shrouded in uncertainty, now held a glimmer of hope. It may not be what I envisioned, but it held the potential for happiness, for a life filled with love and laughter. And that, I realized, was all I could. Let me share a sad experience that occurred to me, which I hope never happens to anyone else. However, if it does, perhaps my story can offer some help. My wife received an invitation to a formal company ball that required ballroom attire. 2 weeks before the event, she began to feel extremely anxious about everything. She even asked me if I was sure I wanted to attend. She suggested that it would be fine if we stayed home and relaxed instead. Normally, she would beg me to accompany her to social gatherings, and if I insisted on staying home, she would give me a list of chores to do. It was strange when my wife suggested that we relax instead of going to the ball, but I reassured her that I was attending. As the day of the event approached, I noticed that she was excessively using her phone, but she didn't explain why. I felt hesitant to ask her about it. During a car ride, her phone connected to the Bluetooth, and she panicked, repeatedly pressing the power button. Her face turned red, and she avoided eye contact, staring out of the window. I felt concerned and wondered what she was so paranoid about me seeing. After my wife went into the store, I noticed that her phone was on the seat beside me. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to look through it. Although I found nothing interesting in the text messages, I stumbled upon an open email indicating that she had test results available on her doctor's website. I clicked on the link and discovered that the results were positive for an incurable STD. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks, and I couldn't believe what I had just read. I wondered if she had any intention of telling me about it soon. It had been 3 months since we had sex, which was the longest we had gone. The test results were dated from 4 days ago. As my wife rushed back to the car with groceries, my mind raced with thoughts of whether I had contracted the STD, too. I decided to quickly check one last thing on her phone. I searched for WhatsApp and discovered that she had it installed. I opened the app and found a conversation with a man named Michael. The only Michael I knew of was her boss. I immediately locked her phone and placed it back on her seat. When my wife got into the car, she appeared relieved to see her phone. She scanned me closely for a few seconds, trying to discern if I had looked through it. I managed to compose myself and drove us to the ball without raising any suspicion. However, I didn't have another opportunity to check her phone. Even though I wanted to confront her about the test results, I decided against it for the time being. I didn't sleep with her that night, and the questions I had were still lingering in my mind. I wondered when she had planned to tell me about her diagnosis and why she hesitated to do so. The possibility of her cheating on me crossed my mind since I didn't have the same diagnosis, but I needed to get tested to confirm it. As we entered the ball, my thoughts were consumed with these questions and doubts. We found our seats at a table, and my wife set down her small handheld purse. The temptation to sneak a peek at her phone was strong, but I held back. Soon after, her boss greeted us personally, kissing my wife's hand and expressing his happiness that she was there. My wife introduced me to him with little enthusiasm, and he showed the same level of disinterest towards me. He then asked if he could have the first dance with my wife, and I felt compelled to agree, even though I didn't want to. As they danced, I kept a close eye on them, hoping to catch any signs of wrongdoing. It looked like they were whispering to each other, which only fueled my suspicions. The situation was becoming increasingly strange, and I had reached my limit. Without any concern for whether my wife would catch me, I began to look through her phone. As I opened WhatsApp, my suspicions were confirmed. Michael had confirmed his arrival time, and they had made plans to sneak away as soon as I was out of sight. I looked up at them in shock, as they were currently at the bar getting drinks. I continued scrolling through their messages, which revealed intimate details about their sexual encounters and their desire to have more. My wife told him about her recent diagnosis, and he apologized for not telling her about it earlier. She got upset and texted him, asking how she could tell me that she now had an incurable STD after 7 years of marriage. He suggested that she could avoid telling me altogether if she left me for him. I took screenshots of their conversation and saved them to my phone. Later, I used my wife's phone to share the screenshots on her social media accounts, where she had many friends in the ballroom community. At the event, I noticed people checking their phones, gasping, and then searching for either my wife or the boss. I saw that some of the messages contained slanderous comments about their colleagues and employees. One person urgently alerted the boss to a problem, and he left the ballroom to attend to it. Meanwhile, my wife was left alone, and I saw her walking back towards our table. She appeared very uncomfortable, as if she had sensed that something was wrong, and people were staring at her. When she greeted me, she seemed skeptical, and I pretended to smile and folded my hands in front of me. I stated that I will be initiating divorce proceedings as she is no longer my spouse. She was shocked and sat beside me, inquiring about the reason for my decision. I returned her phone and asked her to check something she had posted a few moments ago. She appeared bewildered and seemed to struggle to comprehend what I was saying. As she checked her phone, I observed a look of anguish appear on her face, and she looked back at me with tears in her eyes and her hand covering her mouth. She had realized that her boss had likely been terminated, which would also result in her own termination. She became aware that everyone in the room was staring at her. They now knew for certain, instead of just speculating, that she was having an affair with her boss, and that both of them had contracted an STD. It was a despicable and disgusting situation. Overcome with emotion, she cried uncontrollably as she gathered her belongings and left the hotel. I followed her slowly, acknowledging every person who looked my way with a nod. Despite having the keys to my car in my pocket, I had no intention of giving her a ride back to my house. When I reached the car, she was standing there with her arms folded. I asked her what she thought she was doing. She expressed that she wanted to get into the car and go home. I inquired whether she intended to go to her parents' house or her boss's house. She appeared shocked and distressed, imploring me not to do this and insisting that I couldn't be serious. I made it clear to her that I was indeed serious, and that she would never return to my house or ride in my car again. As I unlocked my door, I only entered and locked it again. She began to scream, begging me to let her in, but soon her pleas turned into desperate sobs. A crowd had gathered outside the hotel and was watching us near her car. They were all aware that she was the one who had been involved with her boss. She was the one who had contracted the STD. She eventually gave up trying to persuade me to let her into the car and instead sprinted into the woods along the parking lot. I drove home without giving her any further thought. The next day, I scheduled a doctor's appointment to get tested. 3 days later, I received my test results, which fortunately came back negative. Meanwhile, I learned that my ex's boss had been fired as soon as he got a chance to escape the intense scrutiny he was facing. He quickly packed his bags and left, laughing all the way. He stopped to pick up my ex, and they both disappeared from town and haven't been seen since. I placed all of my ex's belongings between 2 tarps outside, which was more consideration than she had ever given me. However, she never returned to retrieve them. My dog was my most helpful support system during the breakup. I also found out that my ex had been dumped by Michael after just 5 months. I was stunned by the news. It was a glamorous yet unfortunate way to discover the disturbing secrets that my wife had hidden from me. It was fortunate that she had put down her phone, allowing me to expose their infidelity and shameful behavior to everyone they associated with. It was also fortunate that I hadn't slept with her before discovering the truth. It is also fortunate that I wasn't tricked into raising a child born out of their affair. My ex-wife's behavior was akin to that of a succubus, likely choosing to sleep with her boss because of his wealth. A woman who behaves in such a manner can never be trusted. It is indicative of a lack of proper values in life, and she may never develop them unless humbled by life's challenges. It seems like she went through some hardships brought on by her own actions. I wish you all the best. Moving on to today's second story. My girlfriend, who is 22 years old, had a job babysitting for someone. My girlfriend and I both knew a really nice family from church who happened to be wealthy, so spending time in their house was enjoyable. Additionally, their younger children were well behaved and went to bed easily, making babysitting a breeze. On a few occasions, she invited me, 25 years old, over while the kids were asleep, but we never engaged in any inappropriate behavior. Although it did feel like we could have. The family also had an older son named John, who was 18 years old. Despite being an older sibling, they didn't usually ask him to babysit due to his busy schedule with hockey practice and other activities. Once, while my girlfriend was babysitting, she suddenly stopped responding to my texts. I became worried that something was seriously amiss. Although she had previously mentioned that the kids were asleep, I considered the possibility that one of them may have awakened. After waiting an hour without hearing back from her, I decided to drive over to her location to investigate. Initially, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There were no flashing police lights or any other indications of danger. As I walked up to the front door, I observed a strange movement through the window. I placed my hands around my eyes to peek through a small gap in the blinds and see inside the living room. I was taken aback when I caught John in the act of having sex with my girlfriend. In shock, I turned away and attempted to open the front door, only to find that it was locked. Suddenly, a car sped into the driveway and screeched to a halt. John's father jumped out of the car and rushed towards me. Acting on instinct, I raised my hands and explained that I had just arrived. However, John's father paid me no attention and hurriedly unlocked the front door. He charged inside, with John's mother following closely behind, demanding to know what was going on. My girlfriend let out a scream, and John began to shout. In response, John's father ordered him to leave the house immediately, as he was not allowed to be there. Unprotected premarital sex in their home with his younger siblings asleep upstairs. He asked them how terrible it would have been if the kids came downstairs and found them having sex. He looked to my girlfriend, who had only managed to get her underwear back on, and told her she was supposed to be the responsible adult in this situation, and she failed miserably. It was then that my girlfriend noticed I was standing in the doorway. She burst into tears and put the rest of her clothes on. She apologized sincerely to John's dad, mom, and me before she got in her car and left. As soon as my cheating girlfriend left, I realized that I no longer belonged there. Just as I was about to leave, John's mother came outside and closed the front door to drown out the shouting between John and his father. She expressed her remorse to me for the predicament I found myself in, and reassured me that the end of one relationship did not signify the end of the world. I thanked her and inquired about how they were aware of the events that had taken place in the house. She revealed that they had a hidden camera in the living room that streamed to their mobile phones. Although they had seen me every time I visited their house, they didn't mind my presence since they knew I was a well-behaved man. In fact, they believed that their children were safer with me around. I confided in my parents about everything that had happened. Although I lived alone, I still needed their support. They advised me to cut off all ties with my girlfriend, as she had demonstrated that she was not fit to be a wife. However, just as we were discussing this, she called me. She claimed that she had learned from her mistake and promised never to repeat it. Although I believed her, I had no intention of getting back together with her. Instead, I asked her to explain why she had cheated on me and what had happened. When I asked my girlfriend why she had cheated on me, she admitted that after John returned home, he struck up a conversation with her and eventually propositioned her for sex. She gave in without much thought, which was painful for me to hear. I couldn't understand how she could be so careless and act on her primal instincts without any consideration for our relationship. Meanwhile, I had remained loyal to her, even when a woman from my job made advances towards me. That phone call was the tipping point, and I decided then and there that I couldn't stay with her anymore. During that same phone call, I let my girlfriend know that it was over between us. I wished her the best and hung up. Even though she tried calling me multiple times afterwards, I never answered. John's parents had informed my ex's parents and the church about what had happened at their house while she was supposed to be babysitting. Since then, I haven't kept in touch with my ex, but I heard that she had moved out of town. I am sorry to hear that you had to go through the distress and anxiety of discovering your girlfriend's infidelity. It's unfortunate that she did not show more respect towards you, that family, and even herself. Based on her actions, it seems like she may not be mature enough for a committed relationship or even a job. You made the right choice by seeking support and ending the relationship. A trustworthy and responsible partner would never take any action that could endanger their relationship, even if they believe no one is watching. I wish you all the best as you move forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. The calendar on the fridge door had a big red circle around April 20th, marking our 10th anniversary. 10 years, it felt both like an eternity and just a blink. I wanted to make this one special, a surprise that would sweep Clara off her feet. You see, the past couple of years hadn't been easy on us. Work, life, the usual stuff, but I figured a grand gesture would light that spark again. I had it all planned out: a weekend getaway to the little coastal town where we'd honeymoon, and a romantic dinner at La Bella, the fancy Italian place she always dropped hints about. But good things don't come cheap, so I picked up extra shifts at work. Long hours, but thinking of her smile made it worth it. Meanwhile, Clara, she seemed off. Always on her phone, typing away, smiling at texts. I'd ask who it was, and she'd just say, "Oh, just Jen from work," or "It's my sister, nothing important." But something didn't sit right. She'd never been this glued to her phone before. I tried shaking off the feeling, telling myself it was just work stress or something. I remember this one night, 2 weeks before the big day. I got home late, and there she was, sitting on the couch, phone in hand. She jumped when I walked in, like I'd caught her in the act or something. "Everything okay, hun?" I asked, hanging my jacket. She nodded, too quickly. "Yeah, all good, just reading some news." Her phone, though, was angled away from me. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but that nagging feeling in my gut just wouldn't let up. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. My buddy Mike noticed. "You look like hell, man," he said during our break. I shrugged, just tired from the extra shifts. "Or something else?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You think Clarice, keeping secrets?" I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was crazy. But I couldn't. Instead, I just stared at my coffee, the steam blurring my vision. "I don't know, Mike. I really don't know." Days passed, the red circle on the calendar getting closer. I doubled down on the plans, confirming reservations, booking the hotel. I even found a small jewelry shop for a surprise gift, a delicate necklace I knew she'd love. It was perfect, or so I thought. But as the day drew nearer, so did the distance between us. Clara was there, but not really there. Conversations were short, smiles forced. I tried bridging the gap, asking about her day, her friends, anything to break the ice that had formed between us. Then, the day before our anniversary, it happened. I came home early, planning to start the celebrations with a bang. The house was quiet, too quiet. "Clara?" I called out, dropping my keys on the table. No answer. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, then paused at the bottom of the stairs. I heard her voice, hushed, almost a whisper. "Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow." "Can't wait," she said, her tone light, happy. A tone I hadn't heard directed at me in months. My heart sank. I stood there, frozen, as the pieces fell into place. The secrecy, the phone, the whispers. It was as clear as day, yet as unbelievable as a nightmare. I didn't confront her then. I couldn't. Instead, I walked back out, the door closing with a soft click, echoing in the silent house. I needed time to think, to process. But deep down, I knew. The surprise I had planned was nothing compared to the one waiting for me. Hey everyone, quick shout out to all of you watching. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that like button, it really helps us out. And hey, why not subscribe too? That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. It's just a click away, and it means a lot to us. Thanks for the support, and now, let's get back to the fun. You know that gut feeling? The one that tells you something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That's been me for weeks now. It all started when I was hunting for Clara's favorite scarf. She's always misplacing it. I wasn't snooping, honest. But there, in her purse, I found a piece of jewelry, a bracelet, sleek, expensive looking, definitely not from me. I brushed it off at first. Maybe a gift from her sister or a friend, I thought. But then, I found something else, a receipt from Le Jardin, a high-end restaurant downtown. We'd never been there. Too fancy for our simple tastes. The date on the receipt? Last Friday, when she said she was working late. These little things started piling up, nagging at the back of my mind. I kept telling myself there was a logical explanation. Clara wouldn't. She couldn't do something like that, right? We had our problems, sure, but who doesn't? I tried focusing on the anniversary plans, but these doubts, they were like a shadow, always there. I needed a sounding board, so I called up my buddy, Mike. We met at the usual spot, a small coffee shop where we'd solve the world's problems over a couple of brews. "Mike, I found this in Clara's purse," I said, sliding the receipt across the table. He studied it, his brow furrowed. "And this bracelet thing," I continued, "she's wearing it now. Says her sister gave it to her." Mike leaned back, sipping his coffee. "Look, man, I hate to say it, but it sounds fishy." You sure her sister gave it to her? I shrugged, that's what she said. Mike was quiet for a moment, then he said something that stuck with me. Sometimes, we see what we want to see, ignore what's right in front of us. I knew he was right, but part of me didn't want to accept it. I don't know, Mike. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. He shook his head, maybe, or maybe you're not looking close enough. You gotta be sure, man. For your own peace of mind. I left the coffee shop with more questions than answers. Mike's words echoed in my head, you gotta be sure. But how? By spying on her, digging deeper into her things? That wasn't me. I trusted Clara, at least, I wanted to. That night, I lay in bed, watching her sleep. The moonlight cast a soft glow on her face. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. Could I really suspect her of betrayal? I turned over, restless, the doubts gnawing at me. The next morning, I decided. I'd ask her straight up. No accusations, just a conversation. She'd have an explanation, she had to. After all, we were partners, in thick and thin. Trust was our foundation. Without it, what did we have? But as I sat at the breakfast table, watching her hum to herself, the words wouldn't come. I was afraid of the answer, of what it might mean for us, for our future. So, I stayed quiet, the questions unasked, the doubts festering. It's funny, you spend years building a life with someone, thinking you know them inside out. But then, something small, insignificant even, can send it all spiraling. A receipt, a piece of jewelry, that's all it takes to unravel the truths we hold dear. It was our anniversary day, a day that was supposed to be full of laughter and love. I left work early, buzzing with excitement and a bit of nervous energy. The plan was simple, surprise Clara with a night she wouldn't forget. I had everything ready in my head, her favorite meal, candles, and those little white fairy lights she loved so much. I stopped by the store, picked up some fresh ingredients, and a bouquet of red roses. Cliché, maybe, but hey, they were her favorite. The house was empty when I got back, which was perfect for what I had in mind. I started with the decorations, stringing up the lights around the living room, setting the table with our best china, and scattering a few rose petals here and there. I was going all in. Cooking was never really my forte, but I had been practicing her favorite dish, chicken parmigiana, for the past week. I must say, it was turning out pretty good. The aroma filled the kitchen, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I imagined her walking in, the look of surprise, maybe even tears of joy. With everything set, I glanced at the clock. It was time to go pick her up from her yoga class. She'd been going to these new evening sessions for the past month. I figured showing up there, roses in hand, would be the cherry on top of the surprise. I got in the car and headed to the yoga studio. My heart was racing, a mix of excitement and a tiny bit of fear, you know, the good kind, when you're about to do something big. But as I pulled up, something fell off. The lights were out, and the place looked closed. I checked the time, thinking maybe I got it wrong, but no, it was right when her class was supposed to end. Confused, I called her cell, but it went straight to voicemail. Maybe she went out with some of the class members? A quick glance around the parking lot, no sign of her car. That's when a cold, sinking feeling started to set in. Where was she? On a whim, I decided to drive by Jenna's cafe, her regular hangout spot. And there it was, her car, parked right outside. My mind was racing, why would she be here and not at yoga? I parked a little down the street and walked up, trying to keep a cool head. Peering through the cafe window, my heart dropped. There she was, sitting at a corner table, laughing and chatting. But not with Jenna or any of her usual friends. It was with someone I hadn't seen in years, her ex, Mark. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. There they were, cozy as could be, while I was out playing the fool, setting up a romantic evening. I stood there, frozen, the roses in my hand suddenly feeling like a ton of bricks. All the doubts, the suspicions, they all came crashing down in that single moment. What was I supposed to do now? Walk in there, confront them? Or walk away, pretend like I hadn't seen anything? I was lost, man, completely lost. I must have stood there for an eternity, just watching them, trying to make sense of it all. But in the end, I couldn't do it. I couldn't face them, not yet. I turned away, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. That night was supposed to be about us, our love, our decade together. Instead, I was driving back to an empty house, a bag of uneaten chicken parmigiana on the passenger seat, and a heart full of questions and shattered plans. That Thursday evening was meant to be our big night, our 10th anniversary. I left work early, my head swirling with plans and surprises. First stop, the yoga center, to whisk Clara away. I had this image in my head, her face lighting up seeing me there, unexpected but welcome. But life, it seems, had other plans. The yoga center was quiet, too quiet. I walked in, and it hit me, no class today. Confused, I called Clara, expecting a quick answer, a reasonable explanation. But her phone just rang and rang, ending up in voicemail. My heart started racing, not with excitement, but a growing unease. On a hunch, I drove to her favorite cafe, Jenna's Brew. And there it was, her car, unmistakable in the dim streetlight. I parked a little down the street, my mind a whirlpool of thoughts. Maybe she's meeting a friend, I told myself, or grabbing a coffee after missing her class. But deep down, I feared something else. I walked towards the cafe, each step heavier than the last. Through the window, the warm glow of the cafe painted a picture that would stick with me forever. There she was, Clara, her laughter reaching me even through the glass. But she wasn't alone. Across from her sat a man, familiar yet unwelcome in our story, her ex, Jack. I stood there, a bystander in my own life, watching them. They were engrossed in conversation, laughing, touching hands across the table. It was a scene straight out of a movie, except this was my life, and the pain was real. Memories flooded back, Jack, the guy she dated before me. I never liked him, and he'd never truly left our orbit, always a mention here, a casual run-in there. But this was a punch in the gut I wasn't prepared for. I should have stormed in, confronted them, demanded answers. But my feet were glued to the pavement, my heart torn between denial and a truth too painful to accept. I was afraid, not of confrontation, but of what it would mean. Admitting this was real, that my Clara, my partner of a decade, could do this. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed irrelevant, watching them, I felt like an outsider, a stranger to her happiness. The woman I knew, loved, and trusted was a mere facade, and I was the last to know. Eventually, they stood up, still laughing, still in their bubble. Watching them walk away together, something inside me snapped. The surprise evening, the gifts, the plans, they all seemed foolish now. I walked back to my car, a void where my heart used to be. I sat there, trying to make sense of it all. The drive home was a blur, the streets empty, mirroring the hollow feeling inside me. That night, our home felt different, colder, emptier. I sat at the dining table, surrounded by the decorations, the unlit candles, the untouched food. The silence was deafening, each tick of the clock a reminder of what I'd lost, what I'd just seen. In that moment, everything changed. The trust we'd built, the love we'd shared, it all crumbled under the weight of betrayal. I sat there, lost in the ruins of a decade, a heart full of questions, and a night that went from celebration to desolation. There I was, standing outside Jenna's Brew, my heart pounding in my chest. A part of me wanted to turn around, drive away, pretend I'd seen nothing. But the other part, the part that felt cheated and betrayed, it needed answers. So, with shaky legs and a mind swirling with emotions, I pushed open the cafe door. The bell above the door chimed, announcing my entrance. I spotted them in the back, still laughing, still so engrossed in each other. As I walked towards them, the cafe seemed to grow quieter, or maybe it was just the blood roaring in my ears. Clara, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. They both turned, and the look on Clara's face, it was like she'd seen a ghost. James, what are you doing here? Her voice trembled, a stark contrast to the laughter I'd just witnessed. I could ask you the same, I said, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. I thought you were at yoga. Jack, her ex, he had this puzzled look, like he was trying to figure out his role in this unexpected drama. Clara glanced at him, then back at me, her face a mix of surprise and something else, guilt, maybe? James, it's not what it looks like, she started, but her words felt empty, rehearsed. Not what it looks like. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not blind, Clara. I can see perfectly what's going on. She stood up, reaching out to me, but I stepped back. Please, let me explain. It's just coffee, just talking. Just talking, I repeated, my voice rising. You lied about where you were. And with him, of all people. Jack stood up now, his hands raised in a, I don't want any trouble, gesture. Maybe I should go, he muttered, but I barely heard him. No, stay, I said, my gaze fixed on Clara. I want to hear this explanation. Clara sat down again, her posture deflated. James, I've been feeling so lost, so alone. And Jack, he's just a friend, he's been helping me figure things out. A friend, I echoed, the word bitter in my mouth. And did this friend give you that bracelet too? Her eyes widened, and that's when I knew. All the doubts, the suspicions, they were true. James, I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never meant for this to happen. It just did. Sorry, I was struggling to process her words, her confession. You're sorry for what? For lying, for sneaking around, for betraying me? I don't know, she sobbed, her hands covering her face. I don't know. I looked at her, really looked at her. This wasn't the woman I married, the woman I'd spent a decade of my life with. This was a stranger, someone who had shattered our vows, our trust. I turned to leave, the weight of her betrayal heavy on my shoulders. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice barely a whisper. As I walked out, the sounds of the cafe resumed, the normalcy of life going on around me. But for me, nothing would ever be the same again. My marriage, my trust, my love, it had all been a lie. And as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The cafe, once a backdrop to light-hearted chatter and the clinking of coffee cups, had transformed into a stage for my crumbling world. As my voice rose, fueled by betrayal and disbelief, heads turned. I saw the curious glances, the uncomfortable shifting in chairs. I didn't care, my life was unraveling right there, and the audience was the least of my worries. You've been lying to me, Clara. My voice cracked, echoing off the walls. How long has this been going on? She was crying now, her words stumbling over sobs. James, please, let's go home and talk about this. But home was the last place I wanted to be. Home was where I'd planned our anniversary dinner, where I'd hung those fairy lights, thinking they'd shine on a happy evening. Instead, they'd be a mocking reminder of a happiness that never was. Jack, the other man in this tragedy, stood awkwardly. I'll leave you two to talk, he mumbled, but I barely heard him over the storm in my head. No, Jack, stay, I said bitterly. You're as much a part of this as she is. Clara reached for my hand, but I pulled away. How could you do this to us? I asked, my voice a mix of anger and hurt. I'm sorry, James, I never meant to hurt you, she pleaded, her eyes searching mine for something. Forgiveness, understanding, I had none left. The murmur of the cafe had hushed, replaced by an awkward silence. I felt 100 eyes on us, witnessing my life fall apart. But it was her eyes, Clara's, that held me, once full of love, now just full of tears and regret. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of emotions. I can't do this. Not here, not now. Turning on my heel, I left, the sound of her crying behind me. The evening air was a cold slap to my face. I walked to my car, each step heavier than the last. I drove off, the cafe and its whispers fading in the rearview mirror. I drove aimlessly, streets and lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of confusion and pain. The roads were empty, like the hollow feeling inside me. I should have felt something, anger, sadness, anything. But there was just numbness, a void where my heart used to be. I thought about everything, our first date, our wedding, the lazy Sundays in bed. How did we get here? Where did it all go wrong? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswerable, taunting. I found myself at the park where we used to jog on weekends. I stopped the car and just sat there, staring into the darkness. The park was silent, a stark contrast to the chaos in my head. How do you process a betrayal like this? How do you wrap your head around the fact that the person you trusted most in the world could deceive you so completely? I had no answers, just a heartache that seemed to grow with every passing second. The clock on the dashboard told me it was late, but time felt irrelevant. I was lost in a sea of memories, each one a sting, a reminder of what I'd lost, what had been taken from me. Finally, the cold night air and the exhaustion took their toll. I drove back, the streets now familiar, leading me to a home that no longer felt like one. A home where every corner, every picture, every little thing reminded me of her, of us. I parked the car and sat there, the silence deafening. The drive hadn't cleared my thoughts, hadn't eased the pain. It had only deepened the realization that my life, as I knew it, was over. And the hardest part was yet to come, facing the aftermath, picking up the pieces of a shattered trust, a broken heart. The night I walked out of Jenna's brew, my mind was a storm without end. I needed a harbor, any harbor, away from the tempest. That's how I found myself at Mike's doorstep, past midnight, with my life in shambles. Mike, bless him, didn't ask questions. He just opened the door, saw my face, and nodded. We sat in his dimly lit living room, a couple of beers on the table, a silence that spoke volumes. He finally broke it. Want to talk about it? I shook my head. Talking felt like opening a dam I wasn't ready to face. Not yet, I muttered. He nodded, understanding. We spent the night diving into the beers, not much else. Sometimes, you don't need words, just someone to sit with you in the darkness. Morning came, unwelcome. I knew I had to go back, face the ruins of my marriage. The drive home was automatic, my mind numb. I half hoped, half feared Clara would be there. She was. I found her in the living room, surrounded by half-packed suitcases. Our eyes met, and for a moment, there was just that old, familiar pain. Then, she looked away. We need to talk, James, she said, her voice low. I nodded, sitting across from her. The room felt charged, heavy with a decade of love, now tainted. I'm sorry, she began, her eyes not meeting mine. I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to scream, to shout, to ask why she did it. But what was the point? Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Why, Clara, why him, why now? She sighed, a deep, weary sound. I've been unhappy, James. Lost. You were always working, we stopped talking, stopped being us. I wanted to deny it, to defend myself. But in a way, she was right. We drifted, got caught up in the everyday, forgetting each other along the way. I didn't know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you tell me? She shrugged, a small, helpless gesture. I thought I could handle it, find my way back to us. But then Jack, he was just there, and I. The words hung in the air, a confession, an apology, a goodbye. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I loved, now a stranger. Do you love him? I asked, needing to know. She paused, then, I don't know. I just know I can't stay here, not after everything. The finality in her voice hit me like a physical blow. This was it, the end of the road for us. We talked more, about where we went wrong, about the signs we'd missed or ignored. It was a conversation that should have happened years ago, under different circumstances. Now, it just felt like a post-mortem of our marriage. Eventually, there was nothing left to say. The silence between us grew, a chasm too wide to bridge. She finished packing, moving around the house with a finality that was almost ceremonial. When she was ready to leave, she stood at the door, her suitcase in hand. "Goodbye, James," she said, her voice steady. "Goodbye, Clara," I replied, the words tasting like ash. She walked out, closing the door softly behind her. And just like that, she was gone. The house felt emptier, the walls echoing back my own breaths. I sat there, in the deafening silence, the aftermath of our last conversation. There were no winners here, just two people who had lost their way. I thought about the past, the love we shared, the future we planned. Now, it was all just echoes in an empty house. In that moment, I realized the hardest part wasn't the betrayal or the confrontation. It was this, the aftermath, sitting alone, entangling the whys and what-ifs, and facing a future I never imagined. The day Clara left, the house felt like a shell, echoing with the ghosts of what we used to be. I sat there, in the silence of the living room, where her laughter once filled the air. Now, there was just this overwhelming emptiness, a void where our life together used to be. I kept replaying our last conversation, her words, her decision to stay with a friend. It felt surreal, like a scene from someone else's life. But no, this was my reality now. Clara was gone, and I was here, surrounded by memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. In the quiet, I began to reflect on everything, the signs I'd missed, the gradual changes in our relationship. It's funny how you can be so close to someone yet so blind. There were late nights, the sudden weekend plans she had, that I never questioned. Her growing distance, her excuses to avoid spending time together. I chalked it up to stress, to life getting in the way. But now, looking back, it was like a puzzle falling into place, each piece a warning sign I